Hello, everyone. Hope everybody's doing well. And those of you in the U.S., I hope you had a good Thanksgiving. If I'm not mistaken, I think Thanksgiving is the one holiday that's uniquely American. I believe I read that somewhere. I think that's the case. But anyway, it's kind of cool. If that is the case, that is pretty cool. And I hope that those of you in the U.S. had a wonderful time with friends and family. So I haven't posted for a little while, and the main reason for that is that I do not like to just post for the sake of posting, right? If you don't have anything to say, then don't say anything, right? Keep your mouth shut. So that's kind of how I was brought up. And another big reason is just the fact that I've had a lot going on the personal front, and it has been extremely difficult to come up for air, and that's also played a large part. But coming up for a little bit tonight. And also I find it important to, I pray about a post before I actually release it. Usually I sit on it after I make the recording and the video and so forth. I sit on it for a couple more days and pray about it to see if I could even post it. And there are some recordings that I've done over the past week that I have not been led to post, and those are just kind of sitting there. So saying all that to say that I try to be led before I post anything, and I hadn't been led specifically. I did have an idea, and I'd been doing some study and some research on something that kind of popped into my mind. And to be honest, I was thinking about posting that, but I don't have a definitive answer. And I'm certainly not an authority. And it's just a thought that I had. And it's more of a musing. And I thought to myself, can you post something like that? It's just kind of almost like a discussion point to see what other people might know or might have learned or might think, And I was kind of pondering, maybe I shouldn't post that. But today I got a comment on my latest video that kind of spurred me on. It's like, yeah, maybe I should post that. So I think I am going to follow through and do that. And let me read the comment really quickly. Let's see if I can find it. So as I mentioned, the comment was on my last video. And the person said, well, it's December 3rd, 2025. Tell me, why does this continue to happen? We're supposed to watch every day, not just a certain date. You're a liar, just like the rest. Shake my head. I'll pray for you. So that was interesting. That was an interesting post. And I responded. And I basically said that in the video, I was very careful not to set a date. I have never set a date because I've always stipulated that we don't know, right? And I've made that very clear in several videos. Even when Joshua first came out with his date, and I made a statement in my first video that I ever posted that I gave a percentage. What was it, like 85%? Something like that as far as my level of confidence. And then I explained, why am I not completely confident? And I said, well, the reason why is because there's so much that we don't understand on our end. I still believe and continue to believe very firmly that Joshua did hear from God. I know a lot of people don't believe that. I do. But I also know, and I gave an example, that it is very, very easy to misinterpret a vision, a dream. It's so easy to misinterpret. I know that because I have personal experience with that. So since I have personal experience with it, I can relate to it. Where, you do hear something correctly. You do see something correctly. But then when you go to try and interpret what you saw or what you heard, your interpretation is wrong. It's off. But that doesn't negate what you saw or what you heard. And I've been learning about that over the course of many years now. And a good example that I gave in one of my videos was Kim Clement, who I think most people would agree was a true prophet of the Lord. He had some amazing prophecies. I love his daughter has kind of picked up where he left off, not as a prophet, but just to kind of curate his prophecies and sort of correlate what he said with current events. And it's amazing to watch her channel because he was such a prophetic voice before he passed off the scene. And he gave a very famous prophecy years ago, starting back in, I believe his first time prophesying along these lines was in 2007. And he gave several prophecies after that. And they all had to do with Donald Trump presidency in the United States. And he prophesied that Trump would have 2 terms. And those who followed that and who knew about that prophecy and who knew Kim Clement's track record and how amazing it was. I mean, when you have the FBI coming to your house and interviewing you and asking you questions, I shouldn't say interviewing, interrogating you and asking you questions like, how do you know what you know? You know that person is hearing from the Lord, or there is something supernatural going on there. I'll put it that way, right? And he had that happen. His daughter talks about the day that happened. So he was a true voice. And anyway, he had that prophecy that Trump would have 2 terms. He mentioned impeachments. I mean, it was very, very specific in what he said. And so when 2020 happened, people who were familiar with that prophecy were scratching their heads because they were saying, wait a minute, I thought that the Lord said through Kim Clement that he was going to have 2 terms. And there were repercussions, there were recriminations, there was, what about this and what about that? And why did he say this and that? I mean, there was a lot of head scratching. And I listened to it, watched it every day, really, really into it. And of course, we know what eventually happened. And along the way, after 2020 happened, after maybe a year or 2, people started realizing, wait a minute, he never said that the 2 terms would be consecutive. He just said that he would have 2 terms. And of course, we know the end of that story. We're now in the 2nd term. So that's an example, probably the most vivid one I can think of, where you have somebody who truly heard and who prophesied correctly, but after the 2020 election could very easily have incurred the wrath of the proletariat, the people with the knives and the pitchforks saying, you're false, you're false, you're false, when in reality, they didn't know what they were talking about because they didn't interpret correctly. And that is the reason why I always hedge when it comes to dates, because I can't go against what's in the deepest parts of my spirit, which is that Joshua did hear from God. I can't deny that because it's in my spirit. But what I can understand very clearly is that interpretations can be very much incorrect. And people are learning as they go. And we know from Daniel that as things get closer to a specific point that was prophesied, it becomes clearer and clearer and clearer. But it can be veiled in the beginning. We know that. We know that Daniel himself didn't understand. He had dreams, and they definitely came from the Lord, right? But he didn't understand all of them. And some of them bothered him and troubled him so much that it made him physically ill. So there are so many components and so many things that go along with prophecy, with the prophetic, and we have to take those into account. And I try to do that as much as possible, which is why I never say it's going to be thus and so date, because I know that we are fallible. We are fallible, and we can very easily misinterpret. So, but that said, I will say this, as I mentioned a minute ago, I have very much been interested in the prophetic for a very, very long time because I've experienced it in my own life. When you experience things like that, you just have this need to understand it better, right? You just have this need. And so I've done lots of study, listened to lots of voices, etc. And as you go from pillar to post and you see different people and you listen to different people, you will run into the false. That is just a fact. You will run into the false. And I have, for many, many years, always had a very large lookout for the red flag. Okay, this person said that, do I believe it? That person said that, do I believe it? And for the longest time, I shied away from churches, etc., where that type of thing was in operation, not because I didn't believe in it, but because I didn't want to be deceived. And so I figured it was safer to kind of hang out in a standard denominational church where that kind of thing never happened. That way you're quote unquote safe. And I did that for years and years, until finally I felt like I was ready to kind of venture out of that shell and kind of swim in the little bit of a deeper pool. So in the course of going hither and yon, pillar to post, like I just mentioned, I've encountered, all of us, I think probably, or maybe most of us, have been on YouTube. We've listened to this person or that person, and they said something, and then whatever it was that they said, they made a prophetic statement, and then whatever it was that they said did not happen, and they never addressed it. Just kind of went on like nothing ever happened. That is a pet peeve of mine. I hate that. I hate that. If you're going to say something and you say, thus saith the Lord, thus and so is going to happen, and then, whatever you said, it clearly does not transpire, at least not the way that everybody thought. And then you don't address that, answer questions, have a discussion, you pretend like it never happened. That to me is problematic. And I it's a pet peeve of mine. I don't like it. I don't like it at all. So that said, I think it's important to discuss and have those kind of heart-to-hearts to kind of look at things, ask questions, look at things under the hood, pull the covers up and just sort of look around and say, okay, what was this? What was the result of it? What happened? What didn't happen? Et cetera, right? I think that's important. So, all that said, I will put a little bit more meat on the bones of what I've already said about interpretation. I do think that, again, humans are fallible. They are very prone to misinterpretation because our thoughts are not God's thoughts. God says something and we think, it's this. And God is up there shaking his head saying, yeah, no, it's not. Right? I told you that, but you totally misunderstood it. Right? And again, for that reason, it is, in my opinion, not advisable to say, it's going to be this date or that date. Now, that said, I do believe strongly, because the Lord has told us, that we should be watching. We should be watching. And I have no problem at all with somebody saying to me, you know what? That date over there looks really, really interesting. That looks like a high watch date to me. That's like something where we can really just be zeroing in and focusing. Because as human beings, it's difficult to maintain a extremely high level of expectation every minute of every hour of every day. We should be doing that, but as human beings, it's difficult to do that. So, I'll speak for myself. It's difficult for me to do that, on a continual basis. I might have to go buy some groceries that day, right? And so, but it is interesting and exciting when there is a date that makes a lot of sense. Like people were talking about feast days. We know that Jesus fulfilled the spring feasts when during his ministry on earth. We know this. We know he told his disciples, look in the scriptures, for they are they that speak of me. We know that. We know God has given us clues. We know he's given us information. Otherwise, why would Matthew 24 exist? Why would Revelation exist? Why would all of these scriptures exist as clues and things to look for if Jesus didn't intend for us to look and to watch and to try and understand better and better and better until it becomes crystal clear, right? As I said before, I find that extraordinarily exciting. And yes, of course it's disappointing if something passes. Of course it's disappointing. But I know, again, that God is faithful. He is coming as he said he would come. And later on, if there's another date that, oh, wow, what about this thing that we didn't take into account before? oh man, we didn't think to consider that particular thing. Then I get excited again. And to me, that's okay. That's okay. Now, not everybody feels that way. Some people might get, sorely disappointed, in which case you might want to kind of preserve yourself and not expose yourself to all of that, right? Just watch and pray in your prayer closet, ask the Lord, and just you and him, right? You don't have to go onto YouTube and see what so-and-so is saying or what so-and-so is thinking. That might not be your path. And that's fine. That's okay. But I do like to see additional information. I believe when there's a community of people who are watching, this person may see this current event that is very apropos. That person may see this particular, heavenly sign, like Three-Eye Atlas, for instance, that may be something that we can be keeping an eye on. And when you have lots of people that are kind of, curating information that is pertinent to the topic at hand, then you start to get a bigger picture. You start to see, oh, wow, look at this thing that happened. That could be, something that's indicative of one of the signs that Jesus talked about. I think that's okay. I think that's fine. And I think that again, in my case, it's extremely exciting and I enjoy it. But I do want to caveat, if that's something that if a date comes and goes and it bothers you and you get depressed then don't get off YouTube. Go and pray about it. Ask the Lord to show you, to give you peace. Have that relationship with him. We should always have that relationship with him. Always, always. So I just want to make it clear, why I don't set dates. And, but at the same time that I watch very, very closely, and I am intrigued when I see things like the dream that I mentioned in my previous video, which I still believe had some incredible revelation. The whole thing about the rainbow, where he was talking about how everybody has different colors when they were raptured out. That is something that I had never thought about before. But when he talked about it in his dream, I was like, that makes a lot of sense. Another piece to a puzzle, right? Things becoming more and more clear as the day gets closer and closer and closer. And I think there's a lot of value in that. I do. So that was the first thing I wanted to go through. The second thing I wanted to go through was this thought that I had, that I was kind of intimating before. And that's going to be part 2. I'll pick up in a minute. So this is the second part of what I wanted to kind of go through today. And I mentioned at the very beginning of this video that I had a thought, and it kind of came into my mind, and I ended up doing some study and some research on it. And I just wanted to throw it out there because I still don't know the answer to this, but these are just thoughts that I've had. And of course it has to do with the rapture. So I had gone back and I went to look at 2 Kings chapter 2, because honestly, that's probably one of the clearest descriptions that we have in the Bible of a rapture experience and what it was like, right? We know that Enoch was raptured, but the Bible doesn't say too much about that. And we know that Elijah was raptured. And there is a good deal of an entire chapter that is dedicated to that, to what happened. And so I went back and read it. And I've read through this, multiple times. But then something jumped out at me for the first time when I read the chapter. And that just got me thinking and asking questions. So I'm going to read the whole thing, the whole section where it talks about Elijah's rapture journey, so that we will have some context. So this is this happens to be the King James. And it came to pass, when the Lord would take up Elijah into heaven by a whirlwind, that Elijah went with Elisha from Gilgal. And Elijah said unto Elisha, Tarry here, I pray thee, for the Lord hath sent me to Bethel. And Elisha said unto him, As the Lord liveth, and as thy soul liveth, I will not leave thee. So they went down to Bethel. And the sons of the prophets that were at Bethel came forth to Elijah and said unto him, Knowest thou that the Lord will take away thy master from thy head today? And he said, Yea, I know it. Hold your peace. And Elijah said unto him, Elisha, tarry here, I pray thee, for the Lord hath sent me to Jericho. And he said, As the Lord liveth, and as thy soul liveth, I will not leave thee. So they came to Jericho. And the sons of the prophets that were at Jericho came to Elisha and said unto him, Knowest thou that the Lord will take away thy master from thy head today? And he answered, Yea, I know it. Hold your peace. And Elijah said unto him, Tarry, I pray thee here, for the Lord hath sent me to Jordan. And he said, As the Lord liveth, and as thy soul liveth, I will not leave thee. And they two went on. And 50 men of the sons of the prophets went and stood to view afar off. And they too stood by Jordan. And Elijah took his mantle and wrapped it together and smote the waters. And they were divided hither and thither, so that they too went over on dry ground. And it came to pass, when they were gone over, that Elijah said unto Elisha, Ask what I shall do for thee, before I be taken away from thee. And Elisha said, I pray thee, let a double portion of thy spirit be upon me. And he said, Thou hast asked a hard thing. Nevertheless, if thou see me when I am taken from thee, it shall be so unto thee. But if not, it shall not be so. And it came to pass, as they still went on and talked, that behold, there appeared a chariot of fire and horses of fire, and parted them both asunder, and Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven. And Elisha saw it, and he cried, my father, the chariot of Israel, and the horsemen thereof. And he saw him no more. And he took hold of his own clothes and rent them in 2 pieces. He took up also the mantle of Elijah that fell from him, and went back and stood by the bank of the Jordan. And he took the mantle of Elijah that fell from him, and smote the waters, and said, Where is the Lord God of Elijah? And when he had also smitten the waters, they parted hither and thither, and Elisha went over. And when the sons of the prophets which were to view at Jericho saw him, they said, The spirit of Elijah doth rest on Elisha. And they came to meet him, and bowed themselves to the ground before him. And they said unto him, Behold now, there be with thy servants 50 strong men. Let them go, we pray thee, and seek thy master, lest peradventure the Spirit of the Lord hath taken him up, and cast him upon some mountain or in some valley. And he said, Ye shall not send. And when they urged him till he was ashamed, he said, Send. They sent therefore 50 men, and they sought 3 days, but found him not. And when they came again to him, for he tarried at Jericho, he said unto them, Did I not say unto you, Go not? So that's the passage. And I just read 2 Kings chapter 2, verses 1 through 18. So a couple things about that. I actually went through a Bible study where they talked about sort of a little bit of the history of this. And one of the things that they dealt with was, it keeps talking about the sons of the prophets, who were these people. And apparently, from what I read, there was actually a school of prophets that Elijah was very involved with for the last years before he was taken. And apparently Elisha kind of took it over as well. So there was actually a school that they headed up where people learned about the prophetic and about prophecy itself. So that's interesting. That's an interesting concept, because I know myself, I had heard about that before. I've studied other teachers who have mentioned the School of the Prophets. But I remember the first time I heard it, I was surprised, because I had always pictured prophets, like Old Testament prophets, as being, they get called by God. And like, say, Samuel, right? He was called by God as a child. And they become prophets, and they, none of their words fall to the ground, and that's it. But here, it's talking about a group of prophets who were literally part of a school. And if they were a school, then that means that they were learning things. They didn't just know it all from the get-go. They had to learn. And it was a process. And that was, I remember the first time I ever read that, saw that, I was very surprised by that because of my presupposition that I just explained. So, with that in mind, one, we learned that there was actually a school that people went to learn about the prophetic. It wasn't just I'm a prophet and I am now perfect and I'm going to go out and say, thus saith the Lord. Apparently there was a whole lot more to it than that. And I really wish that there was more of a treatment of that in the Bible to talk about it a little bit more so we could understand it better. But at least we know that there was a school. At least we know that. The other thing that that struck me when I read that passage was that each time that Elijah and Elisha went to a different place, Elijah would ask Elisha to tarry. Stay here. I've got to go over there for a while. God's called me over there. Or stay there. I've got to go for a while to this place where God's called me. And so it conveyed a passage of time, at least long enough period of time to where Elijah was asking Elisha to tarry, to stay where you were. Wait till I get back. Or stay here. I guess he wasn't coming back, but stay here, right? There was a period of time, there was passage of time. And so as I read through that journey, this rapture journey that Elijah went on, my supposition, without even thinking about it, was that it was a several days journey, right? He started in Gilgal, and then he stopped in Bethel, and then he stopped in Jericho, and then he finally went to Jordan, and then at that point he was raptured out. And so I just kind of thought, okay, well, this was maybe a several days journey. But then when I read what these sons of the prophets were saying, at each stop that they went to, they encountered these sons of prophets. And each one of them said, do you not know that your master will be taken today? They always said today. And Elisha always replied, yes, I know it. Hold your peace. That was his answer every single time. So I thought to myself, well, wait a minute. Why did each one of these groups of people say every single time, do you not know that this thing is going to happen to you, to your master today? And then, Elisha would reply, yes, I know that. And I thought to myself, well, why is he saying today? If this was a several days journey that they were on, then why are these prophets saying, and Elisha is agreeing with them, right? He's basically a prophet in training. He's got prophetic gifting, right? And he's saying, yep, it's going to happen today. And yet we know, or at least I should say, I suspect, this is the part that I don't know for sure, but I suspect that based on the way it's written, that this was more than one day. And one thing that lends credence to that is after Elijah was taken and then Elisha encountered another group of these sons of the prophets, they basically said, hey, let's go look for Elijah because maybe God took him and dropped him somewhere, right? Maybe he took him to a valley and dropped him there, or took him to a mountain and dropped him there. They were not thinking for sure that he was taken to heaven. And so they were like, let's go look for him. And Elisha was like, there's no reason to do that. You're not going to find him. But then they badgered him, and he got ashamed, like, oh man, they're thinking that I don't care about him. So go ahead and look for him, right? Of course, they didn't find him. How long did they look? They looked for 3 days. And I would suspect that they went through the same course that Elijah had taken, all these different places. They went to all those places to look to see if they could find him. Now, granted, it's going to take them a little bit longer because they're looking, right? They're trying to find somebody. But it still gives you a little bit of a time frame. It took 3 days for them to do that searching. And we know that, this is probably, they're talking about rugged, must be rugged terrain. They're talking about mountains and valleys and things like that. So there must have been some degree of rugged terrain. So it would take a while to traverse that distance. So then I go back to the same question I had. Why did they say it's going to happen today when apparently it didn't happen that day? It happened some days later, right? So I thought, well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe, and I could be wrong, right? That's what I'm saying. I don't know for sure. But I was just trying to do some research to find out, well, how long of a journey was that? So I went to Copilot, and I double checked this with other sources as well, because I don't always trust the answers that AI gives you. I've found, issues. So I try to, double check. And based on what I was able to double check, this appears to be pretty correct. So what Copilot said was Gilgal to Bethel was around 15 miles. Bethel to Jericho was around 20 miles. Jericho to Jordan was around 5 miles. On foot, travelers could cover about 15 to 20 miles per day on average. This means Gilgal to Bethel would have been 1 day. Bethel to Jericho would have been 1 to 2 days. Jericho to Jordan River, less than a day, possibly a few hours. Overall, the journey could take 3 to 4 days on foot, depending on conditions. Okay, using animals like donkeys might slightly reduce the time. So according to that, it's saying a 3 to 4 day journey, which would jibe with the amount of time that the sons of prophets took trying to find Elijah, which they would have gone and basically backtracked along the same path. So if we say 3 days, if that's really true, which again, I'm not saying I know that for certain, for all we know, God could have transported Elijah and Elisha from one place to another. We know that happened to him on occasion. So I'm not saying that this is definitive. I'm just, thinking and pondering. But if we do assume that it was a 3-day journey or thereabouts, then that takes us again back to, why did they say it's going to happen today? And Elisha concurred with them and said, yep, it's going to happen today. That takes me back to what I was saying before about a date, setting a date, and then the actual event does not actually occur on that date. This is again, the only really thoroughly descriptive treatment that we have of a rapture journey in the Bible, of the journey itself, right? And so it gives us something to look at to try to see what the pattern might be. And what I'm seeing is a similarity in that the statement was made, this is going to happen today, but apparently it didn't happen that day. It happened later. And yet there's no statement in the Bible saying, oh, you were wrong, you were false. You said it was going to be today, and it's really going to be, 3 days from now or 2 days from now. You said it was going to be today. Today has come and gone, and Elijah hasn't gone anywhere. What's up with that? It just made me think. It put a question in my mind about what the pattern is. And are we seeing a pattern of a rapture journey where a statement was made, this is happening on this day. And then it didn't happen on that day, but it surely did happen. And it happened in a relatively brief amount of time. It wasn't like a year or 5 years or 10 years. It happened within days of the original announcement. How do I explain why they said a day and it ended up being, a couple days later, 3 days later? I can't explain that. But what I can say is if that's indeed true, then that's a pattern. That's a pattern. And it's something that can't be ignored because we don't have a whole lot to teach us about raptures. They haven't happened too much in human history. So I think it behooves us to study the information that we do have available to us. And so I look at that and I ask myself the question, are we experiencing the same pattern now? Where, it's going to happen on such and so a day, and then it doesn't happen, but it's going to happen, and it's not going to be that much longer. And do I say to this person, that person, the other person, thou art false? Just a question. Again, I don't know for sure, just pondering, but it does raise a question in my mind about whether or not we are seeing a pattern repeating itself. Okay, I know this was a long one, and for those of you who are still listening, I appreciate your time very much. And hopefully we'll get more clarity as time goes on, right? This is a journey. We're learning as we go, and there ain't nothing wrong with that. Thanks a lot. God bless.